So we are very fortunate to be able to talk tonight to Desma Holcomb. She is someone who co-authored the organizing handbook Pride at Work, Organizing for Lesbian and Gay Rights in Unions in 1990 with her partner in politics and in life, Miriam Frank. Uh, Desma recently retired after 8 years as labor education director of NYSNA, the New York State Nurses Association, which is the largest union of nurses in our state. And before that, Desmond had worked for the Empire State Pride Agenda during the New York campaign for marriage equality and transgender rights. She led their ally programs, Pride in My Workplace, Pride in the Pulpit, and Pride in Our Union. Desma's labor background goes back for 43 years as an educator and researcher for organizing, bargaining, and public policy. And she's worked for unions in a variety of sectors: white collar, nonprofit, blue collar, service sector, and healthcare. In each of these unions, she advocated for queer and transgender rights and benefits. And so, welcome, Desma Holcomb, to our show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Okay, so I'm going to start out with a couple of questions that are more general. One is, what is your sense of the state of the United States labor movement at this moment? It has been in a state of decline as far as we understand it over the last several decades. What's your opinion about where things are at now?
So, I think the clearly the numbers have gone down, but without a union, you basically don't have the possibility of democracy at work, of the right to speak your mind and still have a job after you've said your piece, to including to advocate for changes in your own working conditions and your coworkers, and also changes in how the organization or company is run. And so I think that union members still have a disproportionate amount of power in the economy and in politics and social change compared to non-union workers. I would also say that there's a lot of innovative organizing happening, like the Fight for 15 and a Union, where some unions are trying to basically build a social movement, sort of culminating in a union, instead of just trying to go straight to a union organizing campaign, workplace by workplace. So I think there's
It's
still power in the union, and I think power in the movements that unions are helping to build today.
I heard a rumor that the Biden administration might push for $15 federal minimum wage. That it's like double what it is
I
now.
know.
Oh,
Well, but
what's
here's
your
the
opinion
thing
about that?
why that would maybe not be a wild notion. Very strong movements, city by city and state by state, have changed the minimum wage in the country. And so it's very similar to other reforms, civil rights, marriage equality, that if you gain enough ground in enough states with enough population, you basically have shifted half the country or more than half the country in a certain direction. And then the federal government can come through and sort of do a mop up operation, essentially, of like
Mm.
acknowledging that most of the country already has this and then making it a federal change. So I
So
think it's
do
probably
you?
not a wild idea,
Yeah, right. It's
because
kind
I
of
think the
it's.
movement has changed the labor market for low wage workers in so many places through organizing.
And what about recent changes? Do you see younger people more interested in unionizing than they were in the past? What's your impression of that?
So I have, partial information on this, but for example, the UAW has white collar educational nonprofit locals, and workers are knocking down their doors, basically saying, please let me organize. The pandemic has hit our museum, I have no protection, I'm flipping out, and these are very rich institutions going through a crisis, and they're putting it all on me. And I know that other museums have a union with you, so knock, knock, let me organize. And so I think where people have heard through the grapevine that there are actually unions in their sector or among the kind of workers that they are, and we'll touch on this further in our discussions, that if you know that unionization is a possibility, it's something people are turning to in this crisis.
And what about the situation of so-called progressive organizations and not-for-profit organizations, service organizations, where my impression is, having worked for some of them, that the management thinks that you're on a mission and you don't actually need to be paid. You're getting your fulfillment by having the job in the first place. What's
Right,
your
sort
sense
of
of what
a
that looks like when workers in a not-for-profit or progressive organization say we want a union?
so this I have had direct experience in, and also been in conversations with a lot of people who have done this, particularly in queer institutions. I think that,
You want to give an example of a particular place, or would you rather not?
let me just start with the general, although I can start with actually the gay men's health crisis in early 90s. Um, when it is so hard to be out on the job in the regular economy, the fact that you can be out at gay men's health crisis or even have HIV and still be working um, is such a great joy. And only as you slog through with low pay and long hours and stress and burnout do you start to realize that maybe this is not, you know, everything I need in my work life. And people come together and organize. Part of what happens is, as in that case, GMHC became more established, political gains were made, government money started to flow, and corporate gays came out at work and started to donate money through their corporations. That you had a shift in the organization from truly a bootstrap nonprofit into a big organization, one of the biggest employers of queer people in the city. And those board members who are from that business world have a certain notion of what an executive director should be paid, even in the nonprofit sector, in order to be competitive. But they also have basic capitalist ideas about rank and file workers and what they should get paid, which is not much, and make decisions about benefits. Well, we can't afford great benefits. We're a nonprofit. So the gap, the income inequality and the benefit inequality between the top and the bottom becomes really glaring. And that's part of where these changes start to happen and the organizing begins. Immediately the guilt trip is laid on you if you really care about people with AIDS, if you care about this movement, and you can go get a job out in the real world and see how well you do. Here you can be yourself. That whole guilt trip comes down and tries to combat the union solidarity that's growing. And one of the key factors in whether there is success is whether that union is sophisticated about LGBT issues and really
Oh,
has its own act together in terms of who's on their staff. Have they dealt with these issues? Do they have a good track record on this?
we're focused right now. Today, we're talking about what's happening at Housing Works, where this process is going on. But you have knowledge of what's happened in several other organizations that are either affiliated with, associated with queer people, and particularly with the AIDS crisis. So let's talk about GMHC, if you would. You
Okay.
started already. Thank you.
All right. So, So 1199 at the time actually was not taking brave stands on gay rights. Um,
1199 is the Health and Hospitals Workers Union, or was, that's
yeah,
what it was called. Now it's affiliated with the Service Employee
it's
International Union.
International Union.
Right.
And their leadership was had a lot of religious people on it of every race and nationality. And when these issues came up, it was there was not majority support for gay rights. And the organization also had a close relationship with the Catholic hierarchy because the Catholic hierarchy had all these Catholic hospitals. And the leader of the union, Dennis Rivera, would try and set a high standard with the Catholic hospitals and then go after the nonprofit hospitals with a pattern. So he had a very strong working relationship with this pro-labor uh,
We
cardinal.
can't figure out if he's the bishop or the archbishop.
Yes,
Cardinal, right, is what it is.
Cardinal O'Connor. So this happened to be at a time, which is still true, that the Catholic Church was very anti-gay, anti-condoms, anti-safe sex, and an enemy of the AIDS movement and of the queer community. So GMHC just drove a truck through that opening. They said, you know, this union is against you on every issue you
You're
care
talking
about.
about the management of
Yes,
GMHC.
yes. And management said, why would you trust them with your as an organizer? You know, why would you want to be affiliated with them? We are your true, you know, comrades in this movement, and we're the people you should trust. But these corporate board members, one of them financed a union busting attorney. So at the same time that they're saying we are family, they hired someone who ran a very sophisticated and aggressive anti-union campaign. And there are certain classic tactics that are used that were used in that effectively to those workers. One is delay. One is micro litigation with the National Labor Relations Board about who gets to vote and who doesn't get to vote, which I'm going to call union campaign voter suppression. So, and then the longer you wait, the more people can get demoralized. So, voting delayed leads to defeat. And at the end of the day, they separated the professional group from the other workers at GMHC and ran two separate elections instead of the workers staying together and voting as one group. And so while the professionals voted yes for the union, the other folks, the back office folks, voted no. And eventually that union did not succeed. So interestingly, there was a network among all the AIDS rank and file workers across the country. And in Washington, D.C., a similar campaign was unfolding at Whitman Walker, and which was also a major clinic and service agency in Washington. But there were a couple of factors that made it very different. One is that one of the workers there had been an air traffic controller. He had been a leader in the air traffic controllers union,
Wow.
PATCO, and in fact was one of the people jailed by Reagan when he refused to tell his members to go back to work when Reagan said the strike is over. He then became a counselor for all these fired PATCO workers and eventually got sober, got divorced, came out. Now he's a counselor at Whitman Walker. So when the top manager there felt insulted, hurt, rejected that there was an organizing campaign and tried to hold an all staff captive meeting to denounce the union, this guy, along with the fellow rank and file leader of the union, wrote a letter to the executive and said, This will be an illegal meeting. We will be filing unfair labor practice charges. You should think twice before you have this meeting. Just warning you. And so, of course, the executive director called the guy in and Bill Taylor tried to fire him on the spot in, big shouting match. And he basically said, I was fired by President Reagan. I am not scared of you. You must be confusing me with someone who's afraid of you.
Right.
No, I'm right, you're wrong, and we will file and, proceed at your own risk. The other thing that was different, so he had just brilliant organizing skills and kept everyone together and could face down the boss. But the other thing that was different is a major person on the board was the UFCW union leader, Bill Olwell, who was gay
What's the
and who was
UFCW?
out. Huh?
UFCW, what is that?
I'm sorry, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union,
Uh-huh.
which happens to be the parent union of the retail, wholesale, and department store
Department store
union,
workers, right.
RWDSU,
Yes, you.
who's currently organizing Housing Works employees.
Right. Could
So
you say something about Callen-Lorde?
I will in a
Remember.
moment, but
Okay,
let
go
me
ahead.
just say that as a member of the board, this union leader went to the executive director and said, I'm going to quit. I'm going to tell the whole labor movement to stop funding you, and it's going to be a shit show. You need to count the cards, recognize the union, and start bargaining. Just turn yourself around and start over. And he did.
Wow, that's
So
great.
it caught him coming and going. So in
Callen-Lorde, do you
in
know anything of?
2015,
Yeah,
Callen-Lorde organized into, again, 1199, which by then was in the Service Employees Union, and by
right.
then had had an awakening and a new leadership and took a stand for marriage equality, for transgender rights, had out union organizers helping with this campaign. And
And
they,
that, now I just want to say Callen-Lorde is a health center, federally funded health center that was an offshoot of what was called the Community Health Project, which started at the old building of the New York City Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Center. So
yeah,
just to say who that
and
is.
and is a great innovator and a sanctuary for transgender people around their health care. Um, they insisted on having an election and not counting the cards. However, the union
The
was
management insisted on that.
management insisted on that, but the union was wise enough to negotiate a neutrality agreement, and that basically management would not campaign against the union. And so when they had the election, they won overwhelmingly, and then they were able to negotiate a contract. But I
Yeah.
think it was a very different union that dealt with GMHC than later Callen-Lorde.
Yeah. So there's progress. um,
Absolutely,
if
made it up the learning curve.
right. Um, well, I'm talking to Desma Holcomb, a labor organizer, now retired, but probably still active in many ways. So, Desmond, if you could talk, tell us something about what happened at the Lambda Legal Services as far as their organizing union, and also what's happened with the sex shop workers that you know something about.
Yes. So, Lambda Legal is one of these big queer nonprofits, and where the top executives and the lawyers are very well paid, and the people on the intake desk who are front line with people in tremendous pain and crisis and have this really hard job of taking all that in and then trying to give a starter advice on whether there's a legal case in the middle of this mess of a, torture that they're going through. Those people got paid terribly, and they had to pay more for their health insurance than the lawyers did, and there was these inequities in there that were really dramatic and terrible, and led to an organizing drive. And interestingly, the newspaper guild headquarters in DC has a local that is able to organize nonprofits with multiple offices around the country. And that is the union that Lambda Legal organized with. And of course, they, as lawyers, they wanted to do the nitpicky union busting campaign to stop the organizing, and they brought in an extra union busting attorney. But the workers stayed very united and consistently showed that their bargaining committee was representing the whole workforce that was trying to unionize, and they succeeded. They won their election, they had covered all the workers, and they got a good contract. And one of the issues that's very prevalent now is fairness and dignity and proper benefits for transgender workers. So that's a theme that goes through organizing campaigns nowadays. And that was true with these retail stores that were like the Pleasure Chest and Babeland, which were sex shops, sex toy shops, and they had very diverse workforce, including trans people and queer people. And one of the issues that was really important for them is when customers come in and you're trying to talk with them about sex, things can get uncomfortable, funky, harassy, and is the customer always right or not? How do you de-escalate? How do you deal with these things? And getting training on that and being backed up as a worker in those moments was one of the key union issues, in addition to wages and benefits. And they went to the retail and wholesale and department store union, which had been organizing retail workers and had been lifting up trans issues and queer workers around the city for quite a while. And that is the union that is now, that the Housing Works, which has a lot of trans employees and diverse queer workers, turn to for their successful organizing drive. They just won their election, 650 employees, very big deal, and now they're going to be fighting for their contract.
Right. Yeah. So thank you so much, Desmond. I mean, I was saying earlier, we could have you on for a couple of hours to talk about all of the history that you know about the organizing of workers here in the United States and in New York in particular. So is there any last minute thing you want to say to our audience before we close?
Be wise, organize. There is a union out there for you,
Okay.
wherever you're working. And
Okay, that's great. Thank you
you
so
fight,
much.
you win.
Okay, and good luck to us all. Right. In the
Take care.
next year. Thank you so much.
All
Good
right.
night.
Bye bye.
Bye.